Well, I've spent most of my life working with ink in print, not hands-on, although I've been known to take the odd note as a journalist and a film critic for decades, most of it with Maclean's. And Jason has spent most of his life in ink, not making it, but as an art director and a graphic designer working with major magazines like Maclean's. So I knew him, I've known him for, at least 20 years or so, in the beginning at Maclean's. And he never set out to be an ink maker. I never set out to be a filmmaker. We both fell down these rabbit holes, and at some point they converged. And I'm quite serious that I still don't really see myself as a filmmaker, even though I've made a couple of shorts and now my second documentary feature premiering at TIFF. Because it's not that I say, oh, I'm a filmmaker, I have to find a film to make. It's more like the film finds me. So it's all about the film. It's not about a career. I've had enough careers. You know, I don't need another career. If I never make another film, as long as I live, I'll be totally happy. But when the film finds you, it's a siren call. And the way I found this film is that Jason Logan actually has a cameo in my previous film, which premiered at TIFF 7 years ago. He got into ink making. His origin story is, I picked up a black walnut, and then he started making black walnut ink. Well, the black walnut tree happened to overlook the statue of Al Purdy in Queen's Park. And he also became the voice of the statue of Al Purdy Twitter feed, tweeting what the statue saw on any given day. You know, somebody opening a pop can, stubbing out a cigarette. I was halfway through filming Al Purdy when Margaret Atwood said, did you know, I was interviewing her, and I said, she said, did you know that the statue of Al Purdy has a Twitter feed? I said, no, I did not know that. Well, we don't know who it is, but a person tweets from every day, you know, from the staff point of view of the statue. That night, I went to the Giller Poetry Awards Gala. A guy comes up to me, taps me on the shoulder. It's Jason Logan. He says, you got to introduce me to Margaret Atwood. I said, well, actually, she's not here, but it's strange because I was just interviewing her this afternoon. He said, I've got to meet her. I've got to give her something. I said, well, and then he blurted out, I'm the voice of the Twitter feed of the statue of Al Purdy. And I said, wait a minute. What's going on here? Well, inevitably, long story short, the tweets from the statue of Al Purdy became the kind of moments of zen in my film, Al Purdy Was Here, 7 years ago at TIFF. And as part of that, A Bridge Too Far, we filmed Jason collecting black walnuts, and we even filmed him with the 2-camera shoot, 4K, making black walnut ink. Now that didn't make it into the film, but we had footage. And the same thing happened with Purdy. It started, I started shooting something without even trying to make a film, and the footage is what kind of started, you know, it's like a kind of bioluminescent growing substance that just breeds more footage. And, you know, I was cutting a reel for Jason because he needed a reel out of them, you know, and then one thing led to another, and I thought, is there a film in this? And I think what convinced me is when I got a 4K camera trained on an ink test where the alchemical pigments were, the ink was moving with a mind of its own. And I looked at this, and it was like another cosmos. And I thought, nobody's ever seen this before. And as in 3 decades as a film critic, after a while, you just want to see something that nobody's ever seen before. That's, you know, you raise the bar. And I thought, this on the big screen would be amazing. So that's how it started. And then it developed from there. And, you know, the film, it was a much tougher film to make than my last one because the story was pretty clear in my last film. This film, the story could be anything you want. A film about color, a film about ink, a film about Jason Logan. In the end, it was a film about all 3 things. It was not that hard to make, except that the pandemic stretched a 6-month production schedule over 2.5 years. But it was hard to construct because just what kind of a film are we making? And, you know, it was quite the... and in the end, Jason and I sort of said, you know, it was Jason's thought, actually. He said, He said, it seems to me the process of ink making and filmmaking are basically the same thing. You know, you forage, shoot, 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 shoot. You know, you filter, you reduce, you intensify, you package, you know. And it was such a rewarding experience, you know. It was, and it was a kind of odyssey. We conceived it as a road trip because it wasn't just about Jason and the ink. Our silent protagonist was really the ink. Jason, I didn't see as the protagonist, but the vehicle, the agent. And his ink would travel the globe, and he would find these artists. So we have this constellation of artists, Japanese calligrapher, Islamic calligrapher in London, New Yorker cartoonist, Liana Fink, painters, tattoo artist in Malibu. And we assembled this kind of cast, you know? And it was it was always like follow the ink. That was you know, see where it takes us. In a sense, with this film, I just followed the ink, and it took me to amazing places, which I mean, the conceit of the film, and it's more than a conceit, is that the ink is alive. The ink is living. It kind of seems to move with a mind of its own, on the page, on the screen. It's a vector. It's seeking out something. And, you know, we're not anthropomorphizing ink, but in a way it's true. It is composed of voluble, organic ingredients that it's sort of everything that conventional ink is not. I mean, it's not stable most of the time, unless it's, you know, that soot black ink that you used on the Dead Sea Scrolls. The color shifts. It's a moving kind of map of where it comes from. And ink is usually seen as a vehicle for conveying a message about something to somebody. And Jason's ink does that, but it also does something else, which is far more interesting, is that it conveys a message of where it comes from. So it goes both ways, if you like. It's a two-way radio, you know, between the terroir, you know, and the person who is at the seeing end of the ink, you know, the receiver of the ink. And the amazing thing about the film is, whenever, even today, when I try to describe it, you know, oh, the color of ink, what's that? Well, it's about color, it's about ink. It's kind of hard to describe, and it's such a niche. But the idea that, and it's not an important film in any way, in the sense that it's not about a big social issue or in that sense. But, you know, when somebody says, gee, I felt your film was really important, that's kind of nifty, because it's as if we're shedding light on something that people just took for granted and never really stopped to take a look at, whether it's the ink or whether it's the nature around them that the ink comes from. Ink is a universal currency. It's a universal language. It has power, it has value, it has history. It has carried, in a sense, it's like a sort of living fossil of human consciousness. It's like everything that anybody's sort of thought or painted or seen and tried to turn into a visual artifact. I mean, yes, there's paint to say, you know, what's special about ink, perhaps, compared to paint is that it has, well, Jason can talk about that better than I can. I always wonder, what's the difference between paint and ink? But there's a certain direction and intensity to it, and paint's sort of covering a surface in a way. You feel that ink is doing something different. I was getting lost there. What I wanted to say was, it was important to me that the ink, let's start again. It was important to me that the film say things that of social value, even political value. When I say that the film is not a social issue film, all that means is that the social issues are under the surface, that it's not explicit. But it's not an accident that we have a really diverse cast of, you know, an indigenous carver, Haida carver, who uses Jason's ink, indigenous people from Mexico who are into, doing natural dyes, and dyes are not ink specifically, but there's such a close relationship between dyeing and ink that it seemed important in terms of a film about color to get into that. We have an amazing African-American artist, Grace Lynn Haynes, who did 2 virtually consecutive covers for The New Yorker, discovered when she's very young, who specializes kind of in how she uses the color black, and talks about makes this jet black skin, because in school nobody ever taught her how you paint people like her and her family and her friends. So almost like in revolt, she said, okay, I'm just going to paint it pure black. So the blackness of ink. You can't make a film about the color of ink, about color, without talking about how color is signified culturally, racially in our society. But it's interesting, the film doesn't address that very much. I think Grace Lynn does. She makes that point, the significance of that color to her. But it's all kind of food for thought, if you like. We don't want to provide answers. The goal was always in the film to cultivate a sense of mystery, curiosity, intrigue. The way I structured it was, as opposed to an establishing shot and then sort of going inside of it, and I always wanted to do the reverse. I want to sort of start inside of something where people don't know what they're looking at, and then pull back. So it was always the reveal, the reveal, the reveal. And I just figure I want people, like a comedy has to have a certain number of, laughs. For me, this had to have a certain beats per minute or whatever of what the F moments? To me, that's what I like to see in a film, as like sort of head-snapping moments, or just sort of like, huh, really? Or what's that? And it's such a freedom to be able to do that. And frankly, for a filmmaker, that you've been given a license to make a film about color. What more could you want? It's like, here's the sandbox, go play, I wish it was that simple, of course, because, as you can imagine, trying to sort of, the history of ink, for one thing, I thought, well, we can't tell the history of ink in this film, it's too big. But there are these sort of interstitial moments where we pull away from the sort of slow, immersive cinema and do bang, 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 just to try to kind of give some framework and when we did the rough cut screenings, everybody said, oh, we love all the stuff about ink, so give us more of that. So it would have been very easy just to turn into a portrait of the artist, about an ink maker who's doing this strange thing. But again, ink was our real protagonist, and we had to kind of give it its due. Even though what Jason is doing seems to be very kind of artisanal and niche and idiosyncratic, there's a much larger sense of mission there, and it's a very democratic pursuit. Jason is not the kind of artist really who, even though he's front and center in this film, he's not trying to shed light on himself. If you read his book, Make Ink, which is full of pictures, you'd be hard-pressed to find a picture of him where you can even see his face on camera. He does these workshops wherever he goes, with children, with adults, with all kinds of people. He'll get a dozen people together and they'll go foraging and they'll make ink for the first time. And he's a bit like a Johnny Appleseed that way. He's spreading this culture of ink and this sort of message that we need to take a look at the earth underneath our feet. Look at what's in front of you and see what it can tell you and see what you can make of it. It's a profoundly environmental film in the sense that it wants to change, Jason wants to change the way that people look at nature. He originally started out wanting to make non-toxic inks for his kids. And then it sort of went a lot further. He got interested in working with industrial debris and drywall and rust. And I love the fact that, he's not kind of a pure Thoreau Walden-like nature boy. He loves that liminal zone between the city and the wilderness, you know, the place where, the wild place where these, it's almost like tectonic plates of urban and rural rub up against each other. And in that friction, in the weeds, that's where the interesting stuff happens. And he was always taking us outside the box. Like you think you're doing a shoot about, you know, this, and it turns out to be something. He'll find, in other words, you go on a trip foraging for something, he'll be looking for something, like he'd be looking for borax in Death Valley, you know, because it's an ingredient that he likes to use for ink, an invisible ingredient. But, you know, you find cactus flowers, and you find stuff you weren't looking for. He finds chalk, you know. It's the ultimate quest where you find what you're not looking for, as opposed to the traditional romantic heroic quest where you know what you're looking for and you just have to find it. This is sort of almost the reverse. Jason's a very rare human being. He's this kind of visionary genius who, he can go into a boardroom and just slay them with high concept art direction. But he's got a childlike sense of wonder. Most people who have that kind of intellectual power and who can see things so conceptually and so smartly, they've lost the childlike sense of wonder. The coexistence of that in his psyche, I still don't understand it. But he's, I mean, when I say that all we wanted with this film was to induce a sense of awe and wonder and curiosity and disbelief and belief. Really, that's just, Jason just does that without thinking about it. He does it automatically. So I couldn't have wished for, when I said that I don't set out to make a film, that a film kind of lands in my lap, well, Jason kind of landed in my lap. And I just tried not to get in the way. Music was really important in the film to me. And the whole notion of synesthesia, where you can hear colors and you can see sounds. To me, that's sort of what filmmaking is about. People are much less conscious of the sound than the picture, but the sound has an incredible influence on how they see the picture. And when that ink travels across a page, seemingly of its own accord, as if it itself is in search of something, where it may just be some kind of strange chemical reaction, you know. But it is operatic. To me, it's you know, there's a certain amount of poetry. The last film I made was about a poet, and I tried to sort of make it not too poetic, you know, because he wasn't that kind of guy. Al Purdy was very down to earth, so I tried to make it pretty rough and ready. Let him do the poetry, you know. This film, I was looking for the poetry. Between the music and the imagery, I was just hoping to create poetry and not let all the information get in the way. No talking heads, no narration really. Jason is sort of a de facto narrator, but in as much as possible we tried to use natural dialogue and sort of turn that into narration, as opposed to, we certainly didn't want an omniscient narrator kind of telling us, explaining anything. So it was, you know, they call these films documentaries, and I've never liked the word. We're not documenting something, you know. Documents, you know. Donald Trump has documents. I never liked that word, documentary, because we're looking at a substance that, you know, crawls across documents, but there's something about dry and dusty and unmysterious about a document that I just think it's that sort of aesthetic hierarchy between fiction and nonfiction, you know, drama and documentary. I tried as hard as possible to make this film play like a movie, like a like a dramatic feature. You don't see a lot of handheld. You see a lot of static frames, no talking heads, and as little exposition as possible. In other words, you want to to work like a trip. And music, I mean, you know, I sort of paid out twice of what the licensing budget was for music, because I wanted there to be songs in this film, and you generally don't do that in a documentary. I mean, you know, my influences were like Terrence Malick, and you know, I was aiming for that kind of experience. I'll stop blathering now because, you know.
No, you gave that experience. That's how I live.
I guess, you know, it's funny. We had a meeting with a producer, one of the producers, who said, "So what are you trying to tell the world with this film?" And I laughed. I said, "Well, I'm not trying to tell the world anything. I'm just trying to convey. I'm trying to give people an experience. It's a ride." You know, there's no message to the film. That would kind of contradict the whole nature of it. I love watching movies about people making art. Just the opportunity to watch somebody with a pen or a paintbrush moving across a page. There's something just innately improvisational about that activity, and so visual. And I love nothing better than to film. I mean, I love filming the ink even without the paintbrush, but also just films about painters and art. I can never get enough of them because I think they're innately cinematic. If you have a really interesting artist. And the hands, you know, there's a lot of hands in this film. My first film was a short film about hands called Tell Me Everything. It was just hands at work. You know, bakers and massage therapists and all kinds of people who work with their hands, cooks. You never saw anything more than hands. And I came to realize that hands were like faces, you know, that they convey a lot of character, but they have a movement, and sort of, they are like people. They sort of, they're more, in a sense, they're more expressive than faces in some ways, you know. So maybe I'm still making that short film about hands, you know.